Our guest today on Caribbeana is two persons. Gabriel Christian, an attorney at law who is from Dominica, and Mr. Alvin Thomas, also who is from Dominica. We are just meeting Alvin for the first time. He's out in Atlanta, Georgia. And with this technology of Zoom and so on, you're talking to people one place and the other and so forth. So maybe Alvin, tell us a little bit about yourself. We know all about Gabriel, but tell us a little bit about yourself.
Okay, thank you, Vaughn, and let me say good afternoon to you and to Gabriel, and thanks for the opportunity to invite me to have this little conversation with you. When Gabriel called me this morning and told me about it, I told him certainly it would be my pleasure. I would definitely make the time set aside. Was hoping that, I could have done what I had to do and be more readily available. But like I told you, I am in a safe mode. And as you said, with technology, we can make this happen.
Right.
I'm in Thomas. I'm from the Caribbean island of Dominica. I'm currently residing in Atlanta, Georgia, where I stay with my family, my wife, and three adult children, along with 7 grandkids. Prior to moving to Atlanta, well, let me just back up a bit and say I'm retired now. I worked for a little over a decade or more in the optical field, in which I am trained as a trained optician. I manage several of LensCrafters optical shops and operations, but I'm now retired, and I do own, along with my boys, my family, we do own an optical business in Atlanta, as well as one we just recently opened in Dominica in February of this year.
Right.
But prior to moving to the United States, I was very actively involved in several organizations in Dominica. That includes one of those being the Public Service Union, then called the Civil Service Association. I was the general secretary of that organization for close to 9 or more years, and also I served as the president of the Dominica Cooperative Credit Union League board. I was also the vice president of one of the largest credit union on island,
Right.
the Roto Credit Union, which is now called the National Cooperative Credit Union.
Right. Well, you seem to be a well-equipped man to cope
Yes,
with the topic that we're about to discuss,
certainly.
which is Dominica, and it's one of concern to many of us. We
Yes,
out here in the diaspora are seeing
yes,
rumblings and tumblings of violent nature, police called out and so forth, and all with overtures of electoral reform not being correctly expedited and so on. So give us a sense of what is happening. Well, thank God nobody has been killed from what I understand and what I've seen, but give us a sense of the situation there, in Dominica, because it's something that we don't want to see happening throughout the Caribbean, because these
yeah,
things can spread. So
yeah.
what would you say was happening? I mean,
Well, let me put it this way, Vaughn. I think what we are seeing happening in Dominica, and what one might say have sort of activated what you saw transpired recently, is where you have noticed a pattern in the region where leaders today seem to want to undermine the democracy that we have come to enjoy for over a period of time. So when we speak of, and what brought about all what you saw has to do with many, many years of pushing and conversation and activating to ensure that there is proper electoral reform in Dominica, which is the core of one's democracy, of one's country's democracy, elections. And what we've had over the years is what we would describe as a flawed electoral process. Flawed in the sense and to the extent that back in July of 2022, the Caribbean Court of Justice opined that the electoral system in Dominica is bad, and that or use their word, to use their correct word. They said it is tainted and advised that no election should be held unless those taints are removed from the system. And like I said, there has been, over the last 15 or more years, repeated calls for there to be proper election system and processes. Notwithstanding several recommendations from the OAS, from CARICOM, from the Commonwealth Secretariat, several reports. The government, who has been in office now for almost 25 years, quarter of a century, have not seen it necessary to implement any of those reports or any of the recommendations coming out of those reports. And two major areas, or three major areas, I'll say, that one could say undermines that democracy and threatens the whole process is: one, we have an electors list that is bloated and which, in our view, is a corrupt the election process. We have an electoral list of 74 plus thousand persons, 74,874 to be exact, on that electors list. And that is the registered electors, with a population of way below 70,000 persons. So right away, you can imagine what you're dealing with. An electors list of almost 75,000 quote unquote registered electors, where your population is maybe just shy of 70,000. Then you have, of course, the whole question of campaign financing, where there is absolutely no regulations as it pertains to the financing of campaigns or political parties, rather, for general elections. Then you have a situation in Dominica, until this new legislation that just passed, and again, we'll see how effective it is. Dominica is the only island in the jurisdiction in the Caribbean where a person can walk into a polling station to vote without a voter's ID or any form of identification. They just show up.
Right.
They say, my name is Alvin Thomas. The polling clerk or whoever is at the polling station looks on the list. They see the name Alvin Thomas, and you're allowed to vote.
Right.
We're saying all of these anomalies undermine the whole question of democracy, and like I said, elections.
Right.
So what has happened was that the government back in 2019, I think it was, appointed what you call a one-man commission in the person of Sir Dennis Byron, the former chair of the Caribbean Court of Justice, to look into the whole question of electoral reform and to provide some recommendations to that effect, which he did at a cost of some 750 plus, thereabout, $1,000 for that exercise. So Byron, with the assistance of qualified, competent legal draftspersons, presented some recommendations and some draft laws or draft bills that could be presented and pass into law. And the government just chose not to implement quite a large number of those recommendations. One of the recommendations that Byron did was that of campaign financing, which was thrown out. He also did a recommendation to restructure the Electoral Commission, which we felt needed to be strengthened in order to do the work and to be responsible and manage the election process in Dominica. That was thrown out. And the government engaged the Office of the Attorney General and did their own recommendation or proposal. They went into Parliament, and of course, let me also add that several civic organizations, the Bar Association, trade unions, opposition parties, which would, of course, take into account the opposition parties in the country. All submitted proposal and recommendations on a way forward, and in some cases supported quite a bit of the recommendations that Sir Byron presented. Notwithstanding that, the government proceeded to have their own recommendation. That is what
I just wanted to bring Gabriel into the discussion as well, because it appears as though the recommendations Sir Byron made was not acquiesced by the Prime Minister Roosevelt Skerrit.
Absolutely, yes.
So, Gabriel, expound a little more on that. I mean, why do you think, this has not been accommodated by the Prime Minister?
For one reason, and one reason only, because the Prime Minister of Dominica, Roosevelt Skerrit, is running a one-party state. It is a one-party state in the Caribbean now, where the average citizen has less rights than we had when we were an associated state of Britain. Let me just tell you what I'm saying as someone who was in the independence movement with Rosie Douglas, who brought this party to power. The average Dominican citizen is in a more lawless state, a more oppressive state, a state lacking in democratic institutions and the respect for civil rights than we obtained when we were British subjects. Now, this comes, this comes from me with a great degree of pain and anguish and disappointment in the inability that our people have shown to maintain the standards that we had at one point in time after the war, when self-government came to Trinidad, self-government came to Jamaica, self-government came to Dominica. In 1951, we were given the right to vote, and we elected honest men and women. Today, people are forcing their way into power through dark monies, in this case of Dominica, CBI funds, billions of dollars from the sale of passports, paying people thousands of dollars to come into Dominica, Vaughan Martin, who've been living overseas for 10, 20, 30 years, flying them in the morning, flying them out in the afternoon, giving them thousands of dollars. This is what is happening in Dominica today. And Roosevelt Skerrit hires Sir Dennis Byron. He takes an inordinate amount of time to put into words what the OAS, the Organization of American States, said several years ago. 4 things. 1, voter ID cards. They do not exist in Dominica. So you can show up and vote without any voter identification card. 2, purging of the electoral list. As Brother Alvin so eloquently stated, Dominica has about 70,000 persons. The electoral list is about 74,000. So there are more people on the voter electors, the voting list, than live on the island. That is absolutely ludicrous. Number 3, that there be enforcement of the residence requirement. The residential requirement is such that it says you must have not been out of the country consistently for more than 5 years. If you've been resident overseas for more than 5 years, you ought to be stricken. That is not enforced. And finally, campaign finance reform to prevent dark money and the hegemony of the incumbent regime, the party in power, right, to use state resources to dominate the political discourse. And first, and number 5, of course, bribery is against the law. And what Alvin was saying is that the Caribbean Court of Justice, in a case of bribery brought against the government for bribery and treating in an election, I believe in 2014, it took almost 5 years, almost 10 years to get to the CCJ. And the CCJ said that the case, Vaughan, had merit and should be tried. You know what happened? The lawyer, Lennox Lawrence, for the government, writes a letter to the director of public prosecution and tells her to dismiss the case. And she dutifully dismisses the case against the government. The case that the CCJ said should be tried. So this is what you have in Dominica. Right. A lack of democratic governance. You have a dictatorial government, a one-party state, and the police force, which we have a great degree of sympathy for. We support my dad, my granddad, all police officers. As you know, Vaughan, I'm an old cadet. We work with the police their partner organization, has now deteriorated, not everyone, but by and large, into a militia. So we had photographs and we had video of a senior police officer pulling away the camera of a media person from Emo News, standing there peacefully, filming as journalists are known to do, ordering her to get away, get out, and pulling the camera, while two media persons, Curtis Murphy and another woman, from the state-owned radio station, which is supposed to be publicly accessible, standing there, and he says nothing to them. You see, because they are part of the propaganda apparatus. So we're in a situation where the government of Dominica is lawless. It has breached all rules of ethics in governance. It really is a taint on the Caribbean community because the passports they are selling for the billions that they now have in Dubai and other places unknown. And the reason we know that is President Trump's own associate, who is just appointed as an ambassador, filed a lawsuit. And he says he was suing the partners of the government in a hotel project for $7 million, which he said was his share. Dominica's ambassador was a friend of Donald Trump. He said he wanted his share of a passport sales scheme, and he was concerned he would not get his share because it is known that these monies are kept overseas in offshore accounts. So give me my money now because I'm afraid it will disappear. So the reality of it is that on Dominica, we do not have a democracy. Dominicans have been robbed of their democracy, and the government has a majority in parliament and used the police to keep away protesters and went ahead and passed legislation that do not rise to the level of recommendations made by the Commonwealth of Nations, of which we're a member, that do not rise to the level of recommendations made by the OAS, that is the Organization of American States, of which we're a member, and which do not even rise to the level of the recommendations that Skerritt himself paid Sir Dennis Byron to make. He paid the guy $750,000. He made recommendations, and they were only addressed in part and in a very shady way, allowing a lot of nuance so that he can perpetuate himself in power and his party and associates.
Now we have a situation where police accosted hundreds of nationals of Dominica, beating them, using rubber bullets and so forth. It's like a police against the people. And this is a very dangerous situation to happen, especially in the Caribbean. I mean, I'm not hearing any words from any other Caribbean leader.
The CARICOM community, Vaughn, I'll be blunt, has failed Dominica democracy, but they shall pay the price because the passports that are being sold are passports that are marked with the insignia of the CARICOM community. The passports that are being used all over the world by bandits, mafiosi, money launderers, and criminal agents all bear the insignia. That's on the Trinidadian passport. That's on Barbados' passport. That's on Jamaica's passport. So Jamaica, Barbados, and Trinidad and Guyana may not be selling passports, but their allied and associated regime in Dominica, which is absolutely lawless, is doing that to the detriment of the national security, I posit, of Jamaica, of Trinidad, of Barbados, of Guyana, and all of the region's countries, which are not similarly situated in this corrupt scheme that they have been running. And the danger for us is dictatorship is contagious. When you can see police officers in Dominica throwing stones, Von Martin, throwing stones at protesters. There's a video where an elderly gentleman is walking and the police officer knocks him cold to the ground, just knocks him out, and he falls there and they just walk away. So we see, therefore, the government has a police service that's no longer a service. It's not doing any service. It's oppressing the Dominican people, and we intend to take legal action against the law enforcement personnel that are breaching all laws under the United Nations Protocol and other laws having to do with civil society and democracy.
Solution, Alvin?
I think I was on mute. Right. Yeah. No, Vaughn, I subscribe fully to what my brother Gabriel have just said. And one of the things you asked the question, what has the rest of the region been doing about it? And let me just let you know, in case you're not aware of that, there is what is called a regional security system, RSS for short, it's referred to.
Yeah.
And that is the OECS countries, all the OECS countries, and including Barbados. That was set up back in, I believe, 1983, 84, 83, somewhere around that time. And recently again ratified in 1996. And what it is, they came together and formed that regional security system. That was funded, and the initial funding to set it up was provided by the United States. And that too came on the heels of the Grenada invasion and all that stuff that was taking place around that time.
Right.
What has happened in recent times, and you may have heard today what is happening in the village of Salisbury. This government has requested repeatedly the intervention of the RSS to come into Dominica and to subdue the Dominican people when they attempt to stand up for their rights. So we have seen where the RSS has come in cohorts with the local police force, open tear gas on citizens, as they did in Salisbury, and even discharge bullets, rubber bullets, and in some cases, in the last situation in Salisbury, live bullets. That is the RSS. So I'm saying, I am saying this to say that the rest of the OECS, and Mia Motley in particular in Barbados, are complicit in all of that, because the RSS was not designed for that purpose. The RSS was designed in a case where any of the islands are in danger from outside forces or anything to that effect, drug intervention, anything of that nature, the RS would come in.
Hurricane relief. Hurricane relief.
In both the instances where the RS intervened, at no time did the government or the president declare a state of emergency. So the island has no imminent national threat to the island where the president had to declare state of emergency, and as such you had to bring in additional security forces. And finally, I will say one more thing. Dominica is one of the only island in the Caribbean and in the OECS that have the largest footprint of Chinese influence in the country. Chinese have more rights than the local citizens now. And I need not say what system of government exists in China and whether we're using that very same blueprint that is used in China to subdue its citizens.
Yes, yes, boy. Well, this is it's a real tragic situation. I certainly, what are the other politicians in Dominica? Thomas Fontaine, I understand Thomas is saying that he didn't call for any protests or anything like that.
Vaughn, West Indians need to know, people in the United States need to know that Dominica is an absolutely lawless country run by a one-man government of Roosevelt Skerritt. Roosevelt Skerritt, up till a few weeks ago, had the entire opposition under indictment. The former Prime Minister Edison James was under criminal charges. The President of the United Workers' Party, Lennox Linton, under criminal charges. Thompson Fontaine himself under criminal charges. And a whole swathe, even my brother, Dr. Christian, was arrested for threatening to burn down Parliament, a totally bogus charge. So what Skerritt does is he criminalizes anyone who speaks up against him. They lock you up, they beat you up, they charge you, and the cases go on. The last set of cases against Edison James, Thompson Fontaine, Lennox Linton, almost 8 years, Vaughn. The case cannot be heard. For 8 years. Here in Maryland, you have under the U.S. Constitution the right to speedy trial. That means within 6 months of you being charged with a crime, the case should go to court and be resolved. Sometimes under extenuating circumstances like COVID-19, they may have to continue it, but it's really rare. That 7 to 8 years. And so that's what happens. So you're asking a very important question. What has happened is that the courts have been corrupted, with a few exceptions. The police service has been corrupted. The civil service is a tool of the government. The director of public prosecution dismisses a case when she gets a letter from the government's lawyer. This is the country you have now. The parliament is totally under the thumb of Skerrit. So you have no separation of powers, as in an independent executive, an independent judicial branch, and an independent legislative branch. Everything is under one man. And on occasion, the CCJ will speak, and then you may have a few judges here and there who try to do a job. But at the end of the day, you still have the hegemony of the regime that snuffs out the democratic impulse. And that is why we're asking for the help of the international community. I know things are difficult here in the United States, but there's Canada, there's United Kingdom. United Kingdom, a year or two ago, banned Dominica. Dominicans could just buy a ticket and go to England. They placed visa sanctions on Dominica because of the tens of thousands of Iranians, Russians, and Chinese. They've sold, Vaughn, almost 60,000 passports in a 70,000 person country. Do we still have a country?
Gentlemen, I want to thank you for giving us a sense of light as to what is going on in this wonderful, beautiful island of Dominica in the Caribbean. Any last words you'd like to leave us with? Because I know we're gonna have you back again. But any last words you'd like to leave us?
Well, what I would like to say, though, Vaughn, and in thanking you for inviting me to share with you my perspective of what's taking place in Dominica. Like I said when I started off, some of the things that are taking place, though grave and as bold as they are, I think what we are seeing now in the region is an undermining of the people's democracy. Every one of the constitutions of CARICOM or the region, I believe, starts off by we the people. And I think that is being taken away. My call is for there to be more, what I would say, not just engagement, but institutions and persons speaking out to those injustices when they show their face. It is coined that evil don't exist by the person who commits the evil, but the one who sees the evil, says nothing and do nothing. So I think the various civil organizations need to remain resolute. The churches, the trade unions, the business sectors, the professionals, the bar association, and they need to speak up to those issues. This is not an issue whereby, and as Gabriel said, it pains us sometimes to speak to strangers about our country in that manner. So it is my hope that as a people, we continue to stand up and speak up and to protect and maintain our democracy. It is something that requires work every day. It is not something that we should take for granted.
All right. Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Brother Alvin. I endorse detailed all you said. Brother Vaughn, I want to thank you, first of all, for your years of standing in support of Caribbean democracy, of course, and our culture. But I want to read, I want to give a salute to a professor who I do not know. His name is Don Marshall. He's a professor and senior research fellow at the Sir Arthur Lewis Institute of Social and Economic Studies. And this is a report from Barbados Today magazine of today's date, 21st March. It says, and I quote, prominent UWI academic, Professor Don Marshall, has warned Caribbean governments against use of force to quell public dissent following violent clashes on Dominica, where police used tear gas and rubber bullets against unarmed opposition protesters. His remarks followed the violent dispersal of protests in Roseau, where police moved to break up an opposition demonstration against 3 controversial electoral reform bills. He goes on to say, I am, quote, disturbed by developments taking place in Dominica following reports of the use of tear gas and rubber bullets to scatter and bring to an end an illegally assembled demonstration on the part of oppositional groups protesting, or rather against, the contents of 3 electoral bills, he said, and I close quote. Right. That is the first start. We want to hear from the Caribbean governments now of they should forever hold their peace, where they can talk about Africa and all we need to get together and do this, that, and the other, but they cannot talk about the rot, the stench of dictatorship right there in our neighborhood, where the citizenry of Dominica does not have a voice, where there is commodification of our citizenship sold to the highest bidder on the international market to the detriment not only of Dominica, but the wider Caribbean that is exposing itself to that contagion of international bandits with the symbol of the Caribbean community on their travel documents. That's number one. We need to hear from the governments. We need to hear from the trade unions. Trade unions, where are you? The Caribbean trade unions, you know, Tubal, Uriah, Buzz Butler, and all these people, they were very prominent in the independence movement. They are now silent. We need to hear from the trade unions, civil society, the business community, because what happens in Dominica today will happen in Jamaica, Barbados, and Trinidad tomorrow if we're not careful. We will see dictatorship spread, and what we want is democracy to spread, not dictatorship. Thank you, Vaughn.
You're welcome. I've been speaking with Mr. Alvin Thomas and Gabriel Christians, two Dominicans, one in Atlanta, one here in the Maryland area. This is Vaughn Martin. Caribbeana continues.